I'm starting Lag Baomer. Okay, we have a few classes. We'll do Lag Baomer. First of all, Lag Baomer has two bases, right? There's two reasons we have Lag Baomer, and it's kind of funny because they're opposites min hakotza lakotza, right? One reason we have Lag Baomer is because people stop to die. The other reason we have Lag Baomer is because someone died, someone passed away. It's really ironic. And there's actually a bunch of Maimorim from the Rebbe alone, and from the previous Rebbe also. How does it make sense that Lag Baomer you celebrate Pascal Milamos, that the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva stopped and passed away on the one hand, and Rabbi Akiva did pass away on the other? It seems very, very ironic. So, first of all, let me give you some data, okay? I spent a lot of time this morning looking it up. I had extra time, so I spent a lot of time. It's one of the interesting things. The story of Rabbi Akiva's students is written in the Gemara, in Masechta Yevamos, that Rabbi Akiva had 12,000 pairs, 24,000 students that lived in Tzafon, in the north, in the holy places, the Gola. And they they had lack of respect for one another, and they kula meisub eisa pedic, they all died in a very, very short time. 24,000 students died in a matter of weeks from some kind of a contagion, some kind of a magef, some kind of a plague. The world was desolate. There was no Torah left. And Rabbi Akiva went to the Dorim, he went to the south, and forgive me for saying this, that's where the Misnagdim live, in Yerushalayim, as opposed to Golo. He took five men, and you know their names, they're the most famous names in the Mishnah: Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua, Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, and Rabbi Meir. And he taught them the Torah, and from these five men is the whole Teich Baal Peh. Rabbi Akiva was a bottleneck. In other words, Rabbi Akiva lived right after the Churban. Rabbi Akiva watched the second Beis Hamikdash burn. Rabbi Akiva was the one who laughed when he saw a fox running through the Makam HaMikdash. Rabbi Akiva survived Churban Bayisheni. He was murdered al Kiddush Hashem brutally 70 years after the Churban. He lived 120 years. He was 50 years old by the Churban. And Rabbi Akiva lived in a time where the Torah died. Pashik Pshutei. The only Torah left in the world was him. And he taught it to five Talmidim, including Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, who's the author of the Zohar, which is Kabbalah Pnimis HaTorah. And that's why it says in the Gemara, Kulu alimud Rabbi Akiva. All the Torah we have is Rabbi Akiva's Torah. And don't forget that Rabbi Akiva was a Ben Gerim. Akiva's father was a Ger Tzedek. So the Torah we have, you can blame on the Goyim. You understand? We all were once Goyim. Okay, Rabbi Akiva. So we have a Yom Tov. What's the Yom Tov? Paskum el Lomas. They stopped to die. Now I want to ask you, if 24,000 people live and 24,000 people die and there's nobody left, what's the Yom Tov exactly? What's the Yom Tov? There's nobody left to die. What's the Yom Tov? So there's only two ways to explain it. One way to explain it, and both of these days are brought in halacha, is that they interrupted dying. In other words, they died from Beis Iyar. We know that they died for 32 days. Just two opinions went. From the second day of Iyar, after the Chedesh Iyar, till Beis Sivan, the Shlosh Mi'akbala. 32 days. And then Lag Baomer, no one died. But they took a break. One day, no one died. The day before, a bunch of people died. 24,000 people divided by 32 days is about 750 people a day. Whatever. 600 people a day. It's terrible. But on Lag Baomer, no one died. Yippee Agrei Yom Tov, which of course is very strange. The only other way to explain this is that they started to die the beginning of Sfira, Tazai and Nisan, and they stopped dying Lag Baomer, which means you have to say that even though the Gemara says Kula Meisu, they all died, it wasn't Mamish Kula. You have to say some were left. You have to. Because if you don't say some were left, so what's the Yom Tov? But the fact is that Lag Baomer is a Yom Tov, reason number one, because Talmid Rabbi Akiva, Poskum Elomas, Rabbi Akiva, Talmidim stopped to pass away, and it makes sense, you have to assume, that it's not the pshat that they stopped dying that day and they continue dying the next, but that some were pushed left over. It's hard to say that those some were the five that were left, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua, Rabbi Shimon, and Rabbi Meir, because the Gemara says that he went to a different place. Rabbi Akiva moved from the north, from where Rabbi HaKadosh lived, Tzipoiri, Tveria. This is seminary base. Yes, like I say, Tzvasir HaKadosh, they moved from the north to Yerushalayim, from Golil to Yerushalayim, and that's where he had the other five Talmidim. So it's hard to say it was the same Talmidim, but maybe it was. L'choyre davar is some were left. Some of those original 24,000 Amidim were left. And of course, the Gemara says, why did they die? Because there was lack of honor for one another. There was a on it, as you all know. Now, the Gemara tells the story, but the Gemara doesn't give the date. It does not say in the Gemara that they stopped dying on Lag Baomer. It simply says Kula Mesa Beisa Pedek, all during that period. The earliest sources that the story in the Gemara of the Amida Akivas passing away, and that again we're going to go with the assumption that some had to be left over. Anish, what's the Yom Tif? And the death that stopped on Lag Baomer is in the Rishonim. You have early Rishonim who say it. And the Me'iri, I looked it up, I took out the Me'iri, I opened it up and looked inside, said that it's from the Go'inim. In other words, a very long time ago, so long ago, that it was like us and the Alter Rebbe long ago, from the times of the Gemara, a very long time ago, people already knew that Lag Baomer was the day that Talmidei Rabbi Akiva stopped dying, which means that we can assume reasonably that this idea of Lag Baomer is a pashat a Meseira. In other words, Yidden never didn't know this. From the time of the story of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva, the Churban was in the year 68, 69, or 70, right? The Common Era. Less than 2,000 years ago. It's 1900 and let's say 46 years ago. 1947 years ago, something like that, is the Churban HaBayis. Rabbi Akiva lived for 70 years after that, and then he was murdered. Sometime in between that, you're talking about 1,915 years ago, Rabbi Akiva's Talmidim passed away. The Go'inim are 1,500 years ago, Be'erech, or 1,600 years ago, something like this. We have a record, a written record, or a very reliable or oral record, written down by the Me'iri, there's earlier Rishonim who bring this, about the Talmidei passing away. Okay, now, this is more the first reason, yeah. But then there's a second reason. And the second reason is Pum Faked, that Shem Bayachai passed away on Lag Baomer. What's the source of this? The Zohar. Now last year, if you were in seminary Aleph, I brought the Zohar and I taught it to you. I read the Zohar inside. It's a Zohar in Pashas Ha'azinu. It's called Idra Zuta. It's a really, really strange story. I'll tell you why it's strange. The Zohar has two sections. We have all the deep Kabbalah stuff, all the weird expressions of Kabbalah that no one knows what it's about, are in these two sections. One is in Pashas Nosei, it's called Idra Rabba, the big room, and the other is in Pashas Azil, called Idra Zuta, the small room. Rabbi Shem Bayachai gathered together 10 men, including himself.
What language?
Aramaic. By the way, there's a book called Sefer HaTeidoah, which is translated in English, where all this is translated into Hebrew. You can see it in there, in Hebrew or even in English. What's Sefer HaTeidoah in English? Anybody know? What's it called? The Book of Our Heritage. It's really wonderful. He was a Yoki type, did good work. It's the no. Sefer HaTeidoah. First of all, there is English of it. Sefer HaTeidoah is a book on the Yom Tovim, on the Halal, on the calendar, and he quotes the whole thing. He brings the whole passage. Rabbi Shem Bayachai got together 10 men, including himself, and he started teaching Kabbalah. And the sparks were flying. You have no idea. And as they were learning Zohar, 3 of them just passed away. Pasha Kipshuta, like Dadav and Avihu. The Neshama went up from all the Giloyim. Nobody punished them. It wasn't considered an Aveda because it was the end of their lives. They Pashat were Eila, they spoke Pimis HaTeira, they spoke Sedis HaTeira, and the Neshama was Eila Maila. As they stayed in Zeir and Pashas Nasi. One day, it says only 7 left. 3 passed away. Shem Bayachai calls the remaining 7. He's one of the 7. Let's get together. Let's do it again. And this time I'm going to go up to heaven. Now, how much fun do you think that is? Your Rebbe calls you up on the phone or whatever, sends you an email or a WhatsApp or a Facebook or whatever it is, Twitter. It says, let's get together. Let's learn Seides HaTeira. And mine is Shamu Be'ela B'Sara Shamayma. Yeah? Veistach. V'achar by Meisha Rabbeinu. You fight with Midian and then you're going to die. Anyway, they all came. And Rabbi Shem Bayachai taught Torah. And he passed away. And the Zohar describes the whole story. There's 10 pages of Kabbalah that nobody understands. At the end of the last thing, he was in the middle of talking, and then the way the story is told by his Talmidim, Rabbi Abba, who wrote the Zohar down, they couldn't see him, and then they saw him again, and there was a big light, there was a big fire, it was very dramatic. Bottom line is, Butzina Kadisha, the holy candle went out. Rabbi Shem Bayachai was nostalgic. Now it does not say in the Zohar a date either. It does not say in the Zohar a date either. How do we know that this story in the Zohar happened on Lag Baomer? And this is much more controversial. The earliest known sources, the Rebbe writes the Inside Chassidus. Inside Chassidus was a contemporary of the Baal Shem Tov's. And the Inside Chassidus quotes the Arizal. The Arizal is a couple hundred years before the Baal Shem Tov. But that's a long time since Rashbi. In other words, for close to 1,300 years or 1,400 years, we didn't know the date of Lag Baomer. The Zohar we found, the Zohar was found in Halaf Nun, 1240, 1290. Wie viel hat man jetzt? Now we're holding 1980, how are we holding now? 2023. So it's over 700 years ago, yeah? 730 something years the Zohar was found, and by the way, there's a machlekes. There's some people hold the Zohar was found earlier in times of the Goinim, whatever. There's machlekes how long the Zohar has been around. The Zohar disappeared for a long time, and then it reappeared. But in the Zohar you have the story. Where did the date come from? So the secular people, the Apakursim Leminayim, the people who rather make fun than live life, say the whole thing is a Baba Mais. B'chlal, whether they believe the Zohar but certainly the date. It seems to me, and I don't say this with any certitude, but L'cha'oira, the first person to associate the passing of Hashem Yochai found in the Zohar in Azinu. And Lag Baomer is the Arizal. The Arizal is one of the coolest people in history. You know why? He lived all of 36 years. He died, passed away very young. And during his lifetime, he was so powerful, he was so great, that there were no misnagdim. You couldn't mess with the Arizal, you'd burn up. You went to Israel? Anybody been to Israel before? Yeah? You travel on the roads, there's a matzeva for this tzaddik here, matzeva for that tzaddik there, yeah? Those matzevas are not 2,000 years old. They're 500 years old. The Arizal used to take walks and say, here's Rabbi Akiva, here's Rabbi Shimon, here's Rabbi Moshe, here's Rabbi Chaim, here's Rabbi Betel, and whatever Rabbi Arizal said, they put markers. Do you realize that? Hundreds and hundreds of the Kvarim in Eretz Yisrael are not contiguous. Where Hillel is Shammai and buried, and Shammai is buried, we don't know from this man of the Hillel and Shammai. The Arizal used to take walks. And the Arizal was so sensitive to Neshamis that the Arizal said, here's Hillel, finish. And nobody questioned him. The Jews are very contrary. You know, one rabbi says Alpha, the other rabbi says Beis. The Arizal is one of those few people that during his lifetime, before he passed away, he became a legend. The Arizal was not questioned. So the Arizal says that the story in the Zohar and Azinu of Rabbi Shimon Yochai who passed away in Lag Baomer, it's no different. The Arizal telling you this is Rabbi Shimon Yochai's grave. That's how great he was. You must understand that there was a period of a few hundred years there was not a single Jew in Israel. That's true, right? The early Christians, they were called Arian Christians, the Roman, they kicked every last Jew out of Israel. There was a period of a couple of hundred years with no Yidden at all. And that's when the smicha stopped, all these very important things stopped. And since Yidden moved back, Yidden have been living in Israel for a very long time. As long as Yidden have been living in Israel, they have a Messiah. But there was a window, which is shortly after the Zman HaShas, the Mission of Gemara, there was no Yidden. So it makes sense that they lost sight of these Kvarim. Anyway, so this is the deal. Lag Baomer as the Hilul de Rashbi is accepted by all Jews. Nobody questions it, not even Misnagdim. Sfardim redt man nicht. Ashkenazim, Chassidim, Misnagdim, Yemenites, Italians, all the Jews in the world recognize that Lag Baomer is a Hilul de Rashbi based, again, I'm going to assume that the first source of this Inyan is the Arizal. And as far back as Arizal himself, there's a story that Arizal took his own son on Lag Baomer to Miran to give him his first haircut, which is probably the source of upshedding also. How far back does the minig of upshedding go? That Arizal took his son on Lag Baomer to Miran, which is the source of the custom by many Jews that if you live in Eretz Yisrael, you go to Miran to give your child your first haircut in the tziyin, in the matzeva, in the place of Rabbi Shimon Yochai. So first of all, the irony, right, that we have a date, which is a Yom Tov, that celebrates the opposite of death and death in the same sentence. Mitzad echad we have the Gemara that pasku milamos, they stop passing away, and mitzad hasheni we have Yom Tov that Rabbi Shimon Yochai is neshama with el basar hashamayim. And of course, a lot of people have asked this question. It's not a new question. The Rebbe writes about it, and I just saw this morning that the Rebbe explains it in Pashtus. that the Arizal, the Shema Yochai said to be happy. When he was passing away, when he was going into the Idre, he told his Talmidim to be besimcha. And by the way, the Mittel Rebbe, who had a similar histalkus, also told his Chassidim to be besimcha. So this is a simple answer. People die, it's a sad day. In halacha, in nigla de teira, and you are never Chassidim, so you wouldn't know that this is a halacha, but the din is on the yard site of Adam Chashuv. You fast. Right? The only place where Lubavitchers know that from is from Yud Nissen. Why don't we make Shabbos HaGadol on Yud Nissen? Because it's Miriam's yard site, and some people are accustomed to fast. It's the only time a Lubavitcher will ever hear that there's a mitzvah, there's an Indian to tainis meis yem shebeis. Your father's yard site people fast. I met people. Their father's yard site they fast. Their mother's yard site they fast. Or the yard site of their Rebbe they fast. By Chassidim we would never know it. By Polish yard site is God HaSimcha. In Lubavitch it's a busy day, but we don't fast. But in Halacha it's a yem tzayim. Talmid Rabbi Akiva passed away, and they stopped dying. So it's a simcha because there was no death. But it's also the date that Shimon Chai passed away. It's the reason to fast. And it's brought in some svarim, why don't we fast on Lag Baomer? Because l'chayre, if Shimon Chai passed away, so it's a yom tzayim. So again, the simple answer is because he said to be b'simcha. But the deeper answer, this is brought in the Maimorim, is that there's two kinds of neshamas. There's neshamas that have to do with nigla de teira, be'ikir, and neshamas that have to do with nishmas adraisa, the neshama of teira, pnimiyas teira. Neshamas of nigla de teira, they speak on the guf level. So when the guf goes away, they're missing, so it's a sad day. Neshamas, to speak pnimiyas teira, they speak on the neshama level, and the neshama doesn't die, fakir. The neshama has an aliyah. So tzaddikim who are connected to pnimiyas teira on the day of their histalkus, we don't even call it a ptira, a nifta. We say nistalik. The neshama went to a higher level. The neshama has a real aliyah. So by Chassidim, it's a yomtiv. On a yard site, we say l'chayim. We don't fast. Now, like I said to you before, outside Lubavitch, if you were Baba or Belz or Satmar or I don't know what, Ger, Chartikov, Ruzhin, Vishnitz, if you were a chassid from non-Chabad family, on the yard site of a Rebbe, they don't fast. The yard site of a tzaddik is considered a yomtiv. And the Rebbe said once in a Fabrengen, I asked the Frierdiker Rebbe, why is this not our minhag? We should also fast, have a simcha on the yard site, and not say tachanim, because it's a yom hilula. All the tzaddikim of Chassidus are connected to pnimis hateira. So l'chayra, their ptira, their histalkus, their yard site is a yom simcha. So why are we saying tachnun? And the Frierdiker Rebbe answered the Rebbe, quote, when then is da a better tag zochin tanya? When is there a better zochin tachnan? When is there a better day to say tachnan than the yard site of a tzaddik? Meaning, we're saying tachnan because it's a isratz. But in non-Chabad Chassidim and by Sfadim, I'm assuming, but I don't know, on the yard site of a tzaddik they don't say tachnan. It's a yomtiv. So the answer to the question is Talmid Rabbi Akiva, their name was nigla beikir. So their death was a bad thing, was a sad thing. So the fact that they stopped passing away is a good thing. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai himself was connected to Pnimis HaTorah. So fakir, by him it's the other way around. The day he passes away is a yomtiv. It's called Hilul Dashbi, the yomtiv of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. And it's considered an unbelievable yom. The Lag Baomer is one of the biggest yom tevim you didn't have. No one knows what it's for. No one knows why it is. It's one of those days which is, if I looked in Google online, you'll read a lot about Christmas. If you Google online, Lag Baomer, what we're celebrating, you'll hear a lot of angry Jews saying a lot of angry stuff about us stupid people who are making up a Yom Tov that doesn't exist. But Lag Baomer is a Yom Tov that's almost universally kept. It's a big day, Lag Baomer. No one knows why, but Lag Baomer is a big deal. Now, so I just want to say a couple of things. Number one, the Rebbe said many times a crazy story. He repeated it time upon him. That the Arizal had a Talmud, his name was Avraham Alevi, I think. Avraham Alevi was a very big chassid. He was a Talmud of the Arizal. He was probably a big tzaddik, eichet. And he mourned for the Beis HaMikdash especially. He mourned for the Churban Abayis more than other people. And the nature of his mourning, one of the symptoms of his extra avelus was that every single day he would say Nachem. Nachem is the tefillah we say on Tisha B'Av. In Mincha time. Right? Every fast day we say Aneinu. But Aneinu was Hashem should answer our tzaras, Shemei Tefillah. But Nachem is about Bnei Yerushalayim, Mashiach coming, building Beis Hamikdash. He said Nachem every day. Came Lag Baomer, he said Nachem. Now Mistama the Arizal went to Miron that year. By the way, the Gantz Arizal is 18 months. I don't know if people realize this. Arizal lived till his early 30s. Until 30 years old, he lived in Egypt. He was born in Yerushalayim. His father passed away, and his mother took him to Yerushalayim because her brother lived in Egypt. Her brother was a rich man, and that's where the Arizal grew up. The Arizal married his first cousin, his uncle's daughter. And Eliyahu Navi taught him. Eliyahu Navi came to Arizal, taught him to in Chutz La'aretz, in Mitzrayim. And when he turned 30, Eliyahu Navi says, now go to Tzfas. When he came to Tzfas, the head of the kibbutz was the Ramak, the Meshach Cordoviro, the brother-in-law and the successor of Rabbi Shlomo Alkivas, who was Mechaber L'Chadaydi. And Arizal shows up. He's a young guy, black beard. And his Kabbalah is so deep that they don't even understand it, you know. He joined the Chabura of the Ramak, and as long as the Ramak was alive, Ramak was the Rebbe, Arizal was the Talmud. And then when Arizal became Rebbe, and he started to speak, he blew them away. They couldn't relate to it at all. They studied lots of Kabbalah, but Arizal was Shaloi Be'erech. There's a whole story that Arizal took the Achei Temimim into the Kinneret, and he gave him water from Be'eda Shal Miriam. He should be able to understand what he's saying. Arizal was... The Rebbe once said, if the Ramak is Seidas HaTeira, then the Arizal Seidas HaRamak. He was so deep. But the whole Arizal was a year and a half. From the time that Ramak passed away, and the Arizal passes away, is 18 months. So all the Kisveidas, all those books and books and books and books, were spoken in 18 months. The Arizal's writings are rewritten many drafts. There's 5 Maduras came out. It was rewritten over and over again. But the whole Arizal, all this identifying Kvarim and identifying, the whole thing was a year and a half. How many Lag Baomers was he have? 1 or 2? He passed away in Ov. Hey, Ov, it's his yard side. So he had 2 Lag Baomers, the ganze Rebbe. But he gave Torah bis Mashiach noch the Arizal. So Arizal calls over to Avraham Alevi, and he says to him, Rab Shimba Yechoy has to you a taina. Arizal had no problem saying Rab Shimba Yechoy, you know what I'm saying? He says, Rab Shimba Yechoy, I'm assuming they were in Miron, as to how on Yom Simchosei did you say Nachem? How could you fast and you be sad on the Yom Simchosei Darashbi? And this Talmud, Rabbi Avraham Alevi, passed away that year. From a Kpeda of Rab Shimba Yechoy, he said Nachem every day of the year. He said Nachem Simchas Teda, no one heard any tainas. He said Nachem Purim. He said Nachem and Lag Baomer. Rab Shimba Yechoy said, excuse me, this is my day. This story the Rebbe told many times. I heard from the Rebbe myself more than once or twice. The Rebbe told the story quite often, that you got to be careful. Like Baomer, you have to be besimcha, because nobody's dying, by the way. When you'll be at Avraham Alevi, you'll start worrying about such things. You know, Shmedel, Betel, Chaim, and Moshe don't have any trouble with whatever it is. No one's having makpedes on us. Avraham Alevi was a Balmadrega G'doila, the Talmud Adari. But he had the Shimber Choy was makped, and it cost him his life. That he said Nachem, he cried to the Churban Abayis on Yom Simchos Shel Rashbi. So going back to the time where the Arizal, it's been a huge yomtiv, a huge yomtiv. In Eretz Yisrael, they make every year an hadlaka. They make a big. There's many fires, one big fire, and it belongs to a certain mishpacha of Gutta Yidden of Rebbe's. There's letters from the Rebbe Rashab, where the Rebbe Rashab once paid a lot of money to have the schus. He was in Russia. That whoever would light the fire in Iran would do it on behalf of the Rebbe Nishmasei. So our Rabbeim that are Bechlal Mar into these kinds of things, the Rabbeim paid money. They didn't light the fire, but that the schus of lighting the fire, the Rebbe Rashab Getzot Asar Geld, that the schus of lighting the fire Miron should be his. Which means this idea of fire and Lag Baomer has a place even in our culture in Chabad. And Chabad really is not into these kinds of things. But they make every year a very big hadlaka, and people come in the thousands to Lag Baomer, and they sing and they dance. As you remember, a few years ago we had a terrible tragedy, and Rab Shimba Yechoy is going to have to give an accounting for that. I mean, so when you start to talk about it, people say, don't you understand? That was a makam sakana for 100 years. The fact that no one died for the first 99 years is a nes, chein kamoyu. But the Shimon could have held on till Mashiach. Lepel, they're very careful now. They have to be very careful. Because the people used to gather together in such large groups. It was very, very, very unsafe. And the fact that it didn't happen many times before, given a groise nes, but unfortunately a few years ago we had this terrible, terrible tragedy, which is, it's really hard to understand how on Lag Baomer, By Reb Shimon Bar Yochai is Tzion. Reb Shimon Bar Yochai was Megan and his whole dar. The Rashi says in Chumash that Reb Shimon Bar Yochai's generation there wasn't a single rainbow. Right? The biggest tzaddikim, not only they lead the generation, they protect their generation. How could it be by Reb Shimon on his Yom Hilula, by his Tzion? This could happen. It's many people died. Dozens of people passed away. It was a terrible. 45 people were killed. A tragedy. But people come and they celebrate Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. Of course, one of them in Hogim, which is very populous, Chalaka. Chalaka means an upshedding. And the Sherish word Chalaka is by Yankov Avinu. It says, V'nechi ish chalak. Achi, Esav has a lot of hair and I have no hair. Chalaka is from that pasuk, V'nechi ish chalak, that he has no hair. Enter the heart, malas peyes hareish. And then, of course, the custom is then you wear a yarmulke and tzitzis, as Eidim Minig Yisrael. But the biggest custom, like Baomer, is fire. Who decided this, and when it was decided, and why it was decided? It's really, really strange. Everybody makes fires. Now, the Rebbe never came to no fires, as far as I remember. There's always a fire in Crown Heights. There was a fire then. So there's two possibilities. Number one, it's not a Lubavitcher minig, but we have a infestation, we have invasion, we have infection. Yeah. But I'm telling you that the Rebbe Rashab himself paid 1 year to light the fire mirrors. A siman that the Rabbeim didn't have to necessarily participate begufam. The Rabbeim, there were things that Rebbe didn't come to, so we should be able to party. Because if he would show up, we would all have to stand still, and nothing would happen. Could you imagine if the Rebbe came to Simchas Beis Sheva? There would be no Simchas Beis Sheva. It's very simple. So the fact that the Rebbe was not mishtatev, it doesn't necessarily mean it's not our custom. But I never read in the Friedrich Rabbeim who did participate in Lag Baomer that they made a fire. But it's basically a minig Yisrael. By all communities in Lag Baomer, you light a fire. And nobody knows why. Some people say because there's a lot of stories. The story of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai's passing describes these big fires. I think it's a push to zach. And again, I don't think I made this up. I think I saw this, but I didn't see it this morning. Fire draws people. A wise man once told me that there's three things you'll never get bored of watching. The waves of the ocean, men at work, and fire.
What's the second one?
People working. You could watch people work. The building, you're putting up a building, you could stand hours and watch, you never get bored. It's true. And fire. Fire has an attraction. Right? It has an ayem yem. Kishamamid on panos, miskapsa. You put on a torch, people collect. Fire has almost a built-in, if it's safe, a built-in joy, built-in lebedekeit. And the fact of the matter is that Hilula Shal Rashbi revolves around making meduras, making fires. And I want to say something to you girls, okay? What's the siman that a tzaddik is like the biggest level of tzaddik versus the second tier or the third tier or the fourth tier of tzaddik? Okay, it's a good answer, but that's not the one I'm looking for. Huh? They don't pass away. I like that too, but that's what I'm looking for. What is the proof that a person has reached the madrega of tzaddik, the highest levels? I'll tell it to you in Chassidish, okay? This is not Lubavitcher, but it's Chassidish, okay? The biggest Rebbes haben gehabt Schkutzim. Oisvars, bums. Small Rebbes who have mom and pop operations have Chassidim more interested in Chassidus. What's your question? Who's interested in the Maimer? Who wants to daven ba'arichas? How many people? Small Rebbes are surrounded by good Jews. It makes sense. Why? Because good Jews want to eat cholent next to the Rebbe and kishke next to the Rebbe and get his holiness and daven and learn and goes to the Eibishter, yeah? The bigger the Rebbe becomes, not the greater the Chassidim become. The lower the Chassidim become. The greatest tzaddikim were surrounded also, not only, by bumps. If you look at the history of Chassidus, the sign, the trademark of a Rebbe that's reached critical mass is not that he has Chassidim who daven and learn all day long. That, of course. But that he has Chassidim who don't do anything except talk about their Rebbe. And if you say one word about my Rebbe, I'll chop your head off. Shkutzim. It's a fact. It's a fact. The proof that a Rebbe is on the highest madrege is that he has Chassidim who don't do a single thing that the Rebbe says to do except that they love him, ava atzmis. They'll die for him. And you see this by the Rebbe. It's undeniable. The Rebbe has Chassidim who are goyim. Kipshutei. And then people who never Yiddish, and it's very hard to tell. The trademark of the greatest tzaddikim is that even people who have no connection to their tzidkis relate to them. There is no better example of that than Reb Shimon bar Yochai. Reb Shimon bar Yochai was the father of Pnimis HaTorah. In other words, if you were alive at the same time and Reb Shimon bar Yochai was alive, you had absolutely nothing in common with him. This was a man who was basically a neshama without a guf. He was walking around the world, but he was in another universe. He was involved in Torah on the holiest levels, on such a high level where you can't even call it learning. It's like Ruach HaKodesh, it's holiness. And every shnook considered Reb Shimon bar Yochai his favorite uncle. And it's so Sfardim. I heard years ago, they would come in like Miran, and they would roast Chas v'Shalom, Rahman Zan, pig, chazer. But they came like Lag Baomer. In other words, Yidden were so fried that they eat in Eretz Yisrael, which is against the law. But Lag Baomer, you have to show up in Ashbi, Miran. I was breaks the chazer, they don't even know that you're not supposed to eat it. But that'd be Lag Baomer, Reb Shimon bar Yochai to be in Lag Baomer Miran. There are people who are so far from Yiddishkeit, and they relate to Reb Shimon bar Yochai. Understand the Vart. The Vart is that the truth of the Jewish people is the neshama. And the neshama is deeper than the Torah, it's even deeper than Kiyum HaMitzvahs. And the biggest tzaddikim touched the neshama of Jews, and everybody feels connected to him, even if you don't do one single thing he said to do. And you see this by the Rebbe. And every day it's more than the day before. It's unbelievable. Reb Shimon bar Yochai was one of those Jews that he was so holy that even the Jews who were the farthest thing from holiness, they didn't see him as this critical old guy who was screaming at them for not being from. They loved him. There is no logic to there's no logic to Lag Baomer. But the way Lag Baomer is celebrated, where Anoshim Peichas and Verekim, you have in Tanakh, the story of Gideon, right? They kicked him out. Gideon was living in the northern Eretz Yisrael, Menashe. They kicked him out. So he went to live in the Midbar, and he surrounded himself with a bunch of Eisvars, a bunch of losers, a bunch of bums. And then they came running back. And then, we need you to be our Rebbe. He said, you just kicked me out. Okay, we'll let you be a Rebbe now. Come back, be the Rebbe. But I'll bring along all my bums. all my bums. Reb Shimon bar Gideon, in Tanakh. He was kicked out of his family, and he went to live in another place. Who did he take along with him? All the nobodies, all the Eizvars. They were his chassidim. And then they called him back to be the Rebbe. He says, you kicked me out. He says, okay, you can be the Rebbe, but I'll bring all my bums. All my bums are coming along. Reb Shimon bar Yochai's Kedusha is so powerful that the lowest Yid feels close to him, feels safe near him. This is the power of the biggest tzaddikim, you know. The tzaddikim are one lower level. You're afraid to be near them because they're very nervous. You're not religious enough, get away from me. Yeah? The holiest of the holy, who are far greater than the second tier or the third tier or the fourth tier of tzaddikim, every Yid relates to. There's no way to explain Lag Baomer. Of course, if you're a secular Jew, you say they made it up and we're all a bunch of fools. But we believe that a Yom Tov that people keep, especially since it's kept, there's probably one of the largest assemblages in Israel ever during the whole year, is Yidden coming to Miran. And a significant percentage of those Yidden are not frum. They're not Shemesh Shabbos. It's certainly not wearing Streimlach. What do they have with Reb Shimon? What do you mean? Reb Shimon is mine. He's mine. I'm a Yid. He's mine. The fire of Miran, the fire of Reb Shimon reaches the Yid who's the farthest and the lowest away. There's no question about it. And of course, above all else, and this so to speak has to be said emphatically, Reb Shimon bar Yochai is connected to Kabbalah, to Pnimis HaTorah, to the Neshama of Torah, which means Sfardim and Chassidim especially, who place such premium on Pnimis HaTorah, have a very special connection to this date. The Lag Baomer is a big celebration. It always was. From the times of the Arizal. Before, we don't know. It may have been. We just don't know. So I just spent the whole class, and I have 5 more minutes, and I plan to use them, okay? So don't run away yet. Saying the following: the reason for Lag Baomer that the Akivas Talmidim passed away has a much more solid basis in history in terms of documents. The reason for the celebration of Shimon bar Yochai's passing in Lag Baomer doesn't have an earlier source, as far as I was able to find this morning, than the Zmanu Arizal.
But if you go to Yisrael and you stand by Hillel's cave and you say a kapitel Tilim because you believe Hillel is there, then you can celebrate Lag Baomer. It's the same tzaddik, the same Ruach HaKodesh that told you this is Makom Kvede of Hillel was telling you that today is Hillel the Rajbi. And by Chassidim was always a big deal. By the Baal Shem Tov was a big deal. By the Mitzvah Magid it was a big deal. And by the Alter Rebbe was a big deal. And by all the Rebbeim, Lag Baomer, what does it say in Hayom Yom? Lag Baomer, Hayom and Yom Yochadim Lubavitcher, one of those special days. Aganse Yorot Men Gevarta for Lag Baomer. A whole year they waited for Lag Baomer because Lag Baomer by the Rebbeim there were Nishim Gluyim, especially when it came to children. So there's different traditions that we know. I don't know everything, and I don't want to lie to you. I can make it up, and I'll sound very good, but then someone is going to send me a message, and then what's my source? And then I'm going to have to say, I lost the book, yeah? It wasn't printed yet. But what we know is Azoi, that Lag Baomer was not celebrated in Lubavitch. Lag Baomer was celebrated in a village outside of Lubavitch. In other words, Lubavitch was a big city, because it had exactly 6 streets on it, all made of mud. You went to a tinier village, there's only 1 street. There were a number of Chassidim who lived, let's say, 40 kilometers, 50 kilometers, 30 kilometers outside Lubavitch, who had large estates. They were rich people. And they were Lubavitcher Chassidim. And they would make the fabrengen of Lag Baomer for all the Chassidim who came to Lubavitch. And every year there was a fight who would get the schus. And they would make it up here a goydel. There was the Frierdiker writes, there was a few families, has the names. This one lived in this village, this one lived in this village, and they would make the fabrengen for Lag Baomer for all the Chassidim who came to Lubavitch. And whoever won the goydel would prepare a feast for hundreds of people, whoever was in Lubavitch. And the feast, for whatever reasons, I don't know why, but the Sudas Lag Baomer was milchik. As they given the minig. I don't know why, but the Sudas Lag Baomer was milchik. And they would go out to this estate, to this yishuv, Erev Lag Baomer. So let's say, what day of the week is Lag Baomer this year? It's on Thursday? Tuesday. So Monday afternoon, the Chassidim would leave Lubavitch, they would travel, they would walk to the estate, they'd come there, and they'd have a late lunch, And the fabrengen would start, and the fabrengen went non-stop 30 hours. From the afternoon, Erev Lag Baomer, till late into the night, Motzah Lag Baomer. And the fabrengen never stopped. It went constant. The Chassidim would alternate. Nobody sat for 30 hours. I mean, today the guys would sit for 40 hours. They'd fall asleep. They'd wake up. They'd say, okay, did I have enough time? Can I drink 4 more l'chaims? Did I have enough of a break? But they would come and go. But the fabrengen never stopped. There were so many Chassidim that the tish was with food. To essen and to trinkets and l'chaim was non-stop from Erev Lag Baomer in the afternoon till Motzah Lag Baomer late into the night. The fabrengen never stopped. And there's like l'chaim and gesingen and reden. There's some famous stories about Lag Baomer fabrengen and these yeshuvim. There's a meiser once where Rabbi Isaac Homler started to scream at the Hillel Parachet. It was freilich. Lag Baomer was a very special Yom Tov, and all the Chassidim would come to Lubavitch. So the Rebbe would go to this here estate for the marathon fabrengen, which started Erev Lag Baomer and went later to Motzah Lag Baomer. Sometime during the 20th hour of Lag Baomer, the Rebbe would come. The Mittler Rebbe, and then the Tzemach Tzedek with a wagon. And I could just imagine that's here. Chassidim went to Fabreng on a yishuv, not far from Lubavitch, in their hundreds. And the Rebbe is coming. I could imagine how we was gestanden mit der Cheretz. Just imagine it. And the Rebbe came with the wagon. He got out of the wagon and he sat onto the Fabrengen. I don't know if he washed or he didn't wash, but he Fabrenged. And he would say Chassidus. And in Hayom Yom it says that the Mittler Rebbe was not allowed to drink mashke. It was a sakona, physically dangerous for him. But like Baomer, the Mittler began mashke. Und noch gesagt Chassidus. And there were moifsim, there were miracles. I mean, the stories with our Rebbe and Lag Baomer, I make your hair stand on your head. They're not normal. But this was a seder. I know this. The Frierdiker writes about the Mittler Tzemach Tzedek, which is about 50 years. What was after Lubavitch became much smaller? I'm assuming by the Rebbe Maharash these minhagim continued, but I think by the Rebbe Rashab they did it in Lubavitch. I don't think this minig of going to the yeshuvim continued in the later datas, but I could be wrong. But by the Mittler Tzemach Tzedek, which is about 50 years, Mittler Rebbe is 50 years, Tzemach Tzedek is the other 30-something years. This was the seder. And the Rebbe would come and he would say Chassidus, and he would Fabreng, he would say L'chaim, and there were brachas, and there were moisim. This was a seder by Chassidim from Lag Baomer. It was always a big Yom Tov. Now, the Rebbe, our Rebbe, made Lag Baomer into an unbelievably important date. The Rebbe certainly cultivated Lag Baomer. He made more out of it. And the highlight of Lag Baomer, which I'm going to talk about with the next group, is the parade. I just want to say one thing in closing, and I'll decide how I'm going to do this. The miracles on Lag Baomer are staggering. The miracles by the Rebbe Lag Baomer. The Rebbe walked out his front door in his house on President Street, okay? Between this house and the car was a mob. And everybody wanted, the Rebbe didn't stop, he kept walking. You had to run over to the Rebbe and you had 2 seconds to say what you wanted, and the Rebbe gave brachas. And to give in, I know people 18 years after the Chasana had 4 children. 4, 1, 2, 3, 2 sets of twins. Lag Baomer. So the Rebbe, they waited by the Rebbe's house, okay? The Rebbe got in his car, drove to 770, there was another mob. He couldn't get up the steps. Then at some point, the Rebbe went out of 770 to go to the mikveh. Weiter a mob. Just walking down to his car. He got to the mikveh, the mikveh was mobbed. He went into the mikveh, was one mob. Came out of the mikveh, was noch a mob. Came back to 770, weiter a mob. So how many mobs? He had when he left his house, when he came to 770, when he left 770 to the mikveh, going from the car to the mikveh, coming from the mikveh to the car, from the car to 770, then he went to the oil, weiter a mob, that's 7 times. And then when the Rebbe came out from the oil, there was a new mob. And everybody wanted 2 seconds of the Rebbe's time. And Nevada Masad, the Rebbe had things to do. But if you got the Rebbe's attention, they were oiseisu moifsim. A woman told me she was married many years, and she wrote the Rebbe many letters, and her cousin said, you keep nudging. And it was Lag Baomer, she was standing by the mikveh, and she said, she knew she has 2 seconds. Show me the story herself. I said, I wish that I, and she said her name and mother's name, together with my husband, his name and his mother's name, should together be zeichet azar achai. The Rebbe stopped. And the Rebbe turns. She must have written the Rebbe 100 letters over the course of 10 years or more. I got every one of your letters. You'll have many children. She was way past 30. Anyway, she had twins. She said, two is not a lot. Then she had a third. 3 is not. She had 5 kids. Mamish nisim gluyim. Anyway, I'll see you when I see you.